Good morning, everybody. So, not quite everybody is good morning. We have our guest speaker and moderator coming to us from Montreal and New York, respectively. So, for those of us who are in Sydney, it's a welcome to an early morning event for the part of the Raising Peace Festival, which has been organised in Sydney and on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm personally joining you from the land of the Gundungurra and Darug peoples in the Blue Mountains where I live, and looking out over the area known as the Gully, which was and still is a really important spiritual and cultural place of connection with the land and water for the traditional owners. And I just wanted to share a little bit personally about what that means to set us into the frame for this morning's session. So to say that since living here, sorry, just something went very wrong. Is somebody sharing their screen? Because it's just interfered with my screen up it. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to get my screen. I don't know what happened just then. Just a second. Okay, so apologies about that. Just a little technical hitch, must be the morning. It's the morning gremlins. So I just wanted to share something about the Gully where near where I live and where I look out over, and to say something about what I've learned since I've lived here about the story of white settlement and its impact on the Gundungurra and Darug peoples here. So the traditional owners and who used the Gully as a summer camp when they were forced to resettle, when they were forced to resettle because of white settlement, when they came to mine in the nearby valleys. And then, would you believe it, they were forced off their land again, this time for the building of a racetrack in the late 1950s. It's an incredible story of profound trauma and the devastation to the community and also the land. So I've been very conscious of this is where I live and this is what I look over. But recently, the good news part of that is that it has been declared an Aboriginal place, and that local families here work together with the traditional owners on regenerating the land. So I therefore really like to sincerely acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that was never ceded, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So please feel free, if you wish, to include your own acknowledgements of country in the group chat, wherever you might be joining us from. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders or other Indigenous people who may be present with us today, virtually on Zoom. So I'm Dr. Wendy Lambourne. I work with the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Sydney, and I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this event from the department, along with the Great Lakes Agency for Peace and Development, GLAPED. And we're also going to be co-hosting the event next Saturday. But before going into talking about that, I wanted to mention, of course, that this is the event for the Australian launch of Séverine Autesserre's latest book, The Frontlines of Peace, which has been primarily organised by Hand Up Congo, which is a grassroots NGO dedicated to supporting Congolese communities to generate income to improve education, health and well-being. So, you know, we have the launch today. We're very pleased to be able to have Séverine with us this morning. And then next Saturday, the 25th of September, as part of the Raising Peace Festival, again, at this time at 8:30 in the morning, we hope you'll be able to join us then for further discussions, which will enable you to engage with a panel of professionals who work in peace, development and health, public health, and you'll be able to discuss further about the issues raised by Séverine's book. And particularly if you, we apologise in advance if you're unable to respond to your questions today. You could bring them up later for the follow-up session on next Saturday. And also to mention, the next Saturday session will include music and poetry from Congolese artists. So we're looking forward to that as well. But of course, we're very much looking forward to today's events. You'll find on the group chat, I think, the information for both for the Raising Peace website, the Severine's website, and Glee Books website. So if you wanted to purchase a copy of Severine's book, you can do so online. There's links about how to do that on Severine's website, and also it will hopefully be available very soon in Sydney at Glee Books, which we can order online, seeing we're all in lockdown. So that's by way of that part of the introduction. I also wanted to mention a little bit of housekeeping, to please keep your microphones silent. And if you have any questions, comments, anything, you're welcome at any time to put them into the group chat, which will be monitored for the questions for the moderator. So that's my next function here, is to introduce our moderator for the session, Dr. Michael Nest, who I got the pleasure of getting to know when he was based in Sydney some years ago. And he's now based in Montreal, where he works on improving accountability and transparency in government and the mining sector. He's the author of no fewer than 4 books relating to conflict and mining, and particularly with a focus on the Congo, which of course is why he's here today with us for this session. And I just wanted to give a particular mention to his 3rd book, Still a Pygmy, which was he wrote in collaboration with Congolese activist Isaac Bachirongo, who was based in Sydney. And I find this was really significant, having worked in the Great Lakes region myself, African Great Lakes region. It's the first Indigenous Twa to publish his memoir, which is a really, really important contribution to asserting the identity of the Twa people and the Pygmy people more generally, who have been traditionally oppressed and marginalised group in that region. So you know, that's by way of introduction. And so now I'll hand over to Michael. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks for that kind introduction. So hello, everybody. I'm joining you today from Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, which I respectfully acknowledge is the traditional country of the Kanien'kehá:ka, or Mohawk First Nation. And I would like to extend that respect to any Indigenous people who are joining us today for this session. I'll shortly introduce Séverine, but just to reiterate that you can use the chat function for questions. If for some reason you're unsure of technology, you can just wave your hand at your camera. We have a couple of techies who are going to look out for that, and they will be able to allow you to speak. So you can put your question that way if that's what works best. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Séverine. We were graduate students together at New York University many years ago. And over the past 20 years, I've followed her research, her work, and her accomplishments. And she also gave me feedback on my doctoral thesis, for which I'm forever grateful. I have the greatest respect and admiration for her work. Her first 2 books, which I can show you, that's The Trouble with the Congo, and the second one, Peaceland. These 2 books rocked the world of peace building, both in academia and in practice. The United Nations and other peace builders sat up and took notice of what she said. More broadly, her work analyzes the culture of the expert and the culture of practitioner conventions, and how these can prevent clear observation and therefore good reform. This response to her first 2 books showed what evidence-based research can achieve when done well and when communicated well. Séverine has won numerous grants and awards, including this year a knighthood from the French government. However, my favorite award was for her first book, The Trouble with the Congo. It won an award titled Award for Ideas Improving World Order. I just thought that was so cool, like that title. And at the time, she was the youngest person to ever win that award. Séverine is a professor at Barnard College and Columbia University in New York City. She's a practitioner and a scholar. Séverine's years of experience working with ordinary people doing extraordinary things means that her theories and her feet are firmly anchored to the ground. Her new book, which I have here, and which we are launching today, takes her work to a whole other level. I try to read a book for at least 30 minutes at bedtime every night. And The Frontlines of Peace kept me awake and kept me reading well beyond this every night. It is a truly fantastic read, and I couldn't put it down. It's received rave reviews from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Economist, and by readers online. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Séverine Autesserre. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this very kind introduction. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. And thank you, Lucy and Wendy, for helping co-host this event, and Hand Up Congo as well for co-organizing and co-hosting this event. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you. I wish we could all be together in person in Sydney. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, thanks to Michael, who made me discover his city a few years ago. But the good thing with the virtual setup is that I understand we have people from all over Australia with us today. We actually have people from all over the world, which is absolutely fantastic. As for me, as Michael was saying, or Wendy was saying, I'm connecting with you from my office on Columbia University campus, which is in Manhattan in New York City, which I respectfully acknowledge is on the traditional land of the Blackfinger and the Lenape people, Native Americans. And I respectfully pay my, and I pay my respect to their elders, past and present. And tonight, tonight for me, this morning for you, I'm absolutely thrilled to talk with you about my brand new book, The Frontlines of Peace. And so I'm going to share my screen and try to show you a couple of photos and maps. So The Frontlines of Peace is a book about hope. It's a book about the ordinary and yet extraordinary individuals and communities that have found effective ways to confront violence. And so to get started this morning, I thought that I would tell you a story about these kinds of people. The story that actually motivated me to write the book at a time when I really thought that the project was going nowhere and I should just pack up. I was in Congo, I should pack up and go back to New York. And so it's a story that actually starts a long time ago in 2007. And it's a story that takes place in Congo, in the middle of one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. And so in 2007, a little boy named Luca was kidnapped and forced to work for an armed group and for rebels, just like the ones that you see in my photo. And Luca was so small at the time that he couldn't even hold a rifle. So his commanders would march him up front as a human shield. Somehow Luca survived, and after 3 years with the armed group, the militia commanders released him and they sent him back home to his mother, Justine. But Luca had trouble assimilating. He hated school. He was often hungry because his mom didn't have much money. And he still believed what his commanders had really drilled into him, that the only way to survive was to use violence. And so Luca kept running away to join militias. The only time he felt safe was when he had a gun in his hands. He was 8, and it was the only life that he knew. Meanwhile, in the United States, a young Indian American woman named Vijaya Takor was working for various aid organizations focused on Congo. And Vijaya was becoming very uncomfortable with her work because her colleagues used the traditional approach to peace building. They relied on outsider skills and expertise. And as a result, they ended up harming the very people that they wanted to help. So for instance, most of them believed that violence in Congo was due to the illegal exploitation of minerals like coltan, which the young men in my photo are mining. And so they focused their time and efforts on advocating for new laws on conflict minerals. But the new legislation cost many vulnerable people their jobs, and these people then had to join armed groups in order to survive. So whenever Vijaya traveled to Congo, she started asking ordinary citizens what they believed would lead to peace. And that's a photo of her doing just that. And eventually she decided to try something in the village where Justine and Luca were living. In partnership with local activists, Vijaya organized lengthy meetings and workshops so that the residents would develop their own analysis of the conflicts they face and decide what the best responses would be. So the first part of the plan that the villagers came up with was for Vijaya and her fellow activists to give out $40 each to a few village women, including Justine, who used the money to start small businesses like tailoring and donut shops, businesses of the kinds you see in my photos. The businesses took off, and soon Vijaya and the participants had enough money to implement the second part of their plans. So they installed taps for clean drinking water, and they organized trainings for the teachers to learn how to curb ethnic violence rather than fueling it. And eventually, they lobbied local authorities for protection and better services. So Luca now had 3 meals a day. He had shoes without holes, and he had role models who didn't use violence to survive and gain power. And like Luca, all of the villagers were safer and they were healthier. And one day, Vijaya was talking with Justine, and Justine kept using the word success to refer to the whole initiative. It was because Luca had turned 13, and for the first time in his life, he was speaking in the future tense. He had stopped running away all the time, and he was making plans, peaceful plans within his community. He now wanted to hold a pencil instead of a gun. And so now you see where the cover artist has found her inspiration for the cover of my book. As for Vijaya, she decided to create the Resolve Network, which has used this approach to help more than 7,000 people over the past 10 years. All were individuals at risk of being recruited by armed groups, and actually more than half of them were former combatants like Luca. So, as you know, militias have formed and reformed in Congo. The pressure to remobilize has been enormous, but not a single person participating in the Resolve programs has either started or gone back to fighting. And to me, this story is inspiring. It's also very telling because there are big differences between the way most peace-building organizations work and what Vijaya did. Because to start, Vijaya decided to build peace from the grassroots by relying on the insiders, just like Hand Up Congo does with development. So Vijaya decided to rely on insiders rather than always focusing on elite and leaders based in capital cities. And even more importantly, Vijaya didn't come and impose her beliefs, and that way, she avoided doing more harm than good. Unlike so many people before her, Vijaya was humble, she was respectful, and she put ordinary people in the driver's seat. Peacebuilders who work like Vijaya are a small minority in the aid world, but they exist, and I know we have some of them on this call today. I've found them within many different organizations as well in many different countries. And the work that they do is incredibly important because unfortunately, there are many people who face the same kind of terrible circumstances that Justine and Luca faced. You know that more than 1.5 billion people live under the threat of violence in nearly 50 conflicts and more than 50 conflict zones around the world in the countries you now see in red on my map. So peacebuilding is a crucial task for many states and international institutions. And when I say peacebuilding, I really mean any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. The thing is that our templates and techniques for approaching war and peace just don't work. Afghanistan, Colombia, Congo, Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar, we've read and we've heard the same story many times before. There was violence. The United Nations got involved. Donor countries pledged millions in assistance. Warring parties called for ceasefires. They signed agreements, held elections, and the headlines praised peace. And then a week or two later, sometimes just days later, violence flared up again. Often, it had never actually ended, and in many cases, it continued for years after. You know that more than half of all ongoing wars have already lasted for more than 20 years? In just the past 5 years, wars have spawned the worst refugee crisis since World War II. Inhabitants of war-torn countries, when you speak with them, and also onlookers from the outside, they're all fed up with the apparent inability of governments, peacekeepers, and international institutions to end violence. And of course, you're familiar with the kind of headlines that you now see on my slide. And it's the kind of headlines that we see all the time and that newspapers run all the time. And yes, there has been plenty of discussion about what has gone wrong when we've tried to stop wars in the past. But now I think it's time to ask what has gone right. And it turns out that elections don't build peace, and democracy itself may not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. Contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving power to ordinary citizens. Ultimately, many successful examples of peace building in the past few years have involved innovative grassroots initiatives led by local people and at times supported by outsiders, just like the South African peacekeeper you see with me in the photo, often using methods shunned by the international elite. So rather than focusing on handshakes between presidents and abstract peace agreements and negotiations between government and rebel leaders, the Frontlines of Peace details the concrete everyday actions that actually make a difference on the ground. So some of these are bizarre, some are creative, some involve age-old traditions, and some are just common sense. My book explains how peace building can actually work so that we can finally improve the lives of billions of people. And I show that to end violence from war, and also to address violent conflicts at home, whether home is Sydney or New York, Paris or Fort-de-France. We have to fundamentally change the way we view and build peace. And I make this argument by building on 20 years of work in 12 different conflict zones and on more than 800 in-depth interviews. And I want to tell you the story of Ichwi, because Ichwi is quite literally an island of peace in Congo. For the past 20 years, one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II has raged around Ichwi. And despite the presence of one of the largest and most expensive peacekeeping missions in the world, several million people have died and hundreds continue to die every day, but Ichwi itself has avoided mass violence. So the island is surprisingly beautiful. It's actually not surprisingly, but incredibly beautiful. As you can see in the photo I took when I was there. But what makes the place even more noteworthy and the peace even more surprising is that the island contains all of the same preconditions for violence that have fueled generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. So you have a geostrategic location Ituri is located right at the border between Congo and Rwanda, two countries that have been at war on and off since the 1990s. You also have mineral resources, ethnic tensions, lack of state authority, extreme poverty, local conflict over land and traditional power, and many other features that have led to extensive violence in the neighboring provinces. And what's fascinating about Ituri is that order comes not through the police, the state, or the army. It's not the police, the state, or the army who manage to control tensions. And it's not foreign peace builders. It is the members of the community themselves, including the people you see in my photos, and including the poorest and least powerful ones. And they do that by fostering what they call a culture of peace, by organizing in grassroots associations and local structures that help resolve conflicts, and by drawing on strong beliefs that help deter violence by both insiders and outsiders, like blood pacts. Blood pacts are traditional promises between two parties who agree never to hurt each other. So the story of Ituri shows us that local community resources can build peace better than the usual elite agreements and outside interventions. And foreign peace builders can help in this process. So take, again, in terms of development, take the teams of Hand Up Congo. And in terms of peace building, take the teams of the Life and Peace Institute. LPI is a Swedish peace building organization that is involved in various conflict zones and that focuses on working at the grassroots. The LPI Congo team bases its actions on in-depth local expertise, and they reject universal approaches to peace building. They rely on local employees supervised by a few foreigners, and these foreigners often have extensive pre-existing country knowledge. LPI doesn't implement programs directly. Instead, it works with and through a few handpicked local organizations, and the main role of these organizations is to support local people on the ground. These local organizations empower local communities to develop their own analysis of their community's conflict, to agree on the most feasible answers, like they're doing in the photo you now see on my slide, and then to implement those solutions. So you see the difference with the usual way to build peace in war zones. In the LPI model, it's not foreigners based in headquarters and capital cities who conceive, design, and implement peace building programs. It's not national or provincial elites either, and it's not the state or the government. Instead, it is the intended beneficiaries, including ordinary people and including combatants, who conceive, design, and implement peace building programs with the help of LPI and its local partners. So in the Frontlines of Peace, I tell stories like that. And I start by telling the stories of ordinary people, grassroots activists, and foreign interveners who have managed to make a difference in war zones, just like the stories I've told you this morning. Then I describe the limitations of the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually excludes local citizens and ordinary activists. Building on these stories, I suggest a better way to help reestablish peace in conflict zones around the world. And in conclusion, I show how the residents of ostensibly peaceful countries can use the lessons from the book to help decrease tensions at home, ranging from inner city conflicts to political and religious divides. Because by way of conclusion, there is one last thing that I want to mention. All of these ideas, all of these lessons from conflict zones can help us address not only tensions in war zones around the world, like in Congo, but also religious, political, ethnic, and cultural conflicts in places, in ostensibly peaceful countries, like in the United States, where I'm located, or in Australia, or in Europe. And of course, I'm more than happy to talk more about that during the discussion, if you're interested. And of course, our Congress and our representatives and our governments have an important role to play, because as we all know, real peace lasts only when built both from the top down and from the bottom up. But the important point is that whether at home or abroad, we sorely need more individuals like Vijaya and Justin, and like the inhabitants of Ichwi. We sorely need more organizations that work like Resolve and Hand Up Congo and the Life and Peace Institute, and more programs that follow the basic principles that I've told you about. Because it's with organizations and programs like these that we can help the 1.5 billion people who live under the threat of violence in conflict zones around the world, and that we can also improve the situations in our own communities. So all of these ideas are not magic ones, but because they take into account deeply rooted causes of conflict, they can definitely be game changers. So if you want to know more about that, please do ask a question now or on Saturday morning during the panel on Saturday morning. Actually, Q&As are always my favorite parts of this kind of events, and the panel on Saturday will be fantastic, and I'm personally very much looking forward to it. You also feel free to follow me on social media afterwards. I have, like, you know, the standard Instagram and Facebook account, but I'm the most active on Twitter. You can find the full text, the free version of the full text of all of my articles on my webpage, severineautesserre.com, along with a lot of resources that you may enjoy. And of course, my 3 books have a lot more stories, details, and ideas about everything that we're discussing this morning. And I actually consider the Frontlines of Peace to be the best of my 3 books. So I'd be really honored if you would check it out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Séverine, for that hopeful, enthusiastic, and thought-provoking presentation. So we do have questions that are starting to come in. And just to remind people, if you're having trouble with the technology, you can literally just wave your hand at your camera, and our tech people will figure out a way to get you to ask your question. Otherwise, please post your question in the chat. So the first question that's come in the book, and I think particularly in connection to Somaliland, you talked about the possibility of scaling up peace initiatives. So how could that happen? How does that happen? And is there any role in scaling up that you see for outsiders?
Right. So Somaliland, I didn't talk about Somaliland this morning, but it's an important part of the book because it shows that local people can help build peace not only on a small scale, like in Ichwi, but also over a large territory and a quasi-state. Somaliland is, just very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Somaliland is this autonomous region in the north of Somalia. And you know that Somalia has been extremely violent for the past 20 years, has experienced a lot of terrorism. Somaliland went through a devastating independence war with Somalia in the 80s and the late 1990s. And for the past 20 years, Somaliland has experienced very little violence, very little terrorism, and it has a well-functioning state, even a functioning democracy. And so what's important about Somaliland is that if you look at a map, and I have a map in the book, it's a country, it's a territory that's as large as countries like North Korea or Syria, And the population is 4 million people. So it's a population that's larger than the population of Bosnia or Uruguay. And it shows that it is possible to scale up, if we want to use this term, to scale up peace initiatives. But the thing is that there is no template, and that's something that I keep saying in the book. We cannot use the templates from Ijwi or the templates from Somaliland, because precisely the way we scale up in Somaliland is based on Somaliland's own cultures, values, society, the way the civil society is organized, and what makes sense for them. So the way they scaled up is that they built on their own beliefs, on the clan system, on their version of Sharia law, of Muslim law, on their version of Muslim law and value, and on things that are extremely specific. The tribal system and the tribal code is very specific to Somaliland. It's something that helped them scale up the peace in Somaliland, but that obviously wouldn't work if we were trying to replicate it in Ijwi or in Colombia or in the United States. So the important thing when we think about scaling up is a couple of points that I emphasize throughout the book. The first one is always making sure that we use both top-down and bottom-up. I'm trying to be very clear that I don't replace one with the other, but both go hand in hand. And that's where we need outsiders, because foreigners are really the best placed to help make the link between national and international elites and grassroots leaders. That's really something that I've seen everywhere I've done research, whether in Congo, in Colombia, in Israel and the Palestinian territories. So that's one of the roles for outsiders, really helping make the linkage and helping both grassroots actors and national elites work together and communicate better together.
Okay, thank you. So the second question comes from Peter, and he asked a question about communities where Resolve had worked. And he wondered, have these communities avoided being attacked by the militias? I know you said that they had not, recruits had not come from those communities, but have they actually avoided being attacked, if you're aware of that? And then have they those communities managed to have an impact on the broader politics of DRC? I guess whether that's provincially or nationally.
Thanks, Peter, for this question. Because the community where Resolve has worked have not managed to avoid being attacked. That's one of the things that to me shows how important Resolve work is, because despite the fact that there was attack, there was violence all around them. When I was in Congo last 2 years ago, before the pandemic, I went to visit one of the Resolve program in Kinshasa. If any of you know Kinshasa, it's this small town in North Kivu that is really one of the heart of a lot of violence and a lot of attacks and a lot of armed groups. So the armed groups are extremely active in this place, but the people who work with Resolve actually try to maintain a semblance of peace in their community, and especially to not go back to fighting. And so Resolve has had successes in specific neighborhoods, in specific communities, in specific families. I'm not aware of impact on the broader national landscape, or even I know they've tried to advocate at the provincial level. I'm not aware of advocacy efforts that have actually succeeded at the provincial level. Their efforts have remained extremely robust at the local level, but they're still looking for better ways to impact the provincial and national level, because obviously all of the communities, that's what they want. They want to scale up their efforts, and they want the whole province and the whole country to be at peace.
Okay, thank you. So another question, I'm just trying to order the questions so they're connected. Cynthia asked about being able to having the capacity and the energy to do peace building in local communities when often people are very poor and they're really just trying to get by and make an income. So I guess what have you observed about that and that ability to make those connections?
Yeah, that's something that that coming from the United States and knowing that I come from a very privileged background, because I have something to eat every day and I'm safe. I was really careful about thinking, do I place too much? Do I place the onus of peace building on people who already have so much to deal with and so many other problems that it's actually unfair and it's actually ethically wrong. And I remember talking with people in Ituri. Ituri is, I mean, you know that North Kivu is a port. I mean, Congo is one of the poorest countries in the world. North Kivu is really poor in Congo, and then you go to Ituri and the level of poverty is even higher than in other parts of North Kivu, which is higher than in other parts of Congo. So I talked with people there, and they looked at me as if I was completely stupid, and they said, but you know, that's my life, that's my community, that's my family. I want to protect my family. I want to protect my kids. And also, if I don't have peace around me, and if I don't, you know, if I don't do the things that I need to keep my community safe, I'm not going to be able to eat. I'm not going to be able to access my land. I'm not going to be, so to them, like, I think it's only people like me, academics based in the ivory tower in New York, who think, okay, like we have peace on the one hand, and then development, and then you know, democracy. But when I was talking with people in Ituri and then in other really poor community, like in Somaliland is extremely poor. People were telling me the two go hand in hand. And so by trying to make my community safer, I'm actually helping make sure that I can eat, that I can address all of my daily problems. And to me, I thought that was a really convincing answer. And actually, the people I see who are the model peace builders I portray in the book, the people who do a lot, some of them are among the poorest people in their community, and the people who actually feel a lot of violence, they're not poor. So I don't think that that putting the, I mean, that involving deprived members of the community and the poorest member of the community is something that is putting an undue burden on them. It's actually something that they view as a matter of respect, and as something that they want to be involved in.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's a very nice segue to this question from James, who asked, what is peace building? Because doesn't it mean different things to different people?
Yeah, thank you, James. That's one of the questions I love when I have that question, because that's why I can tell you stories that I like. So yes, peace building. So I have the academic definition of peace building. Peace building means any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. And that's super vague, precisely because people have all different definitions of peace building. And so what I did when I wrote the Frontlines of Peace in my previous book, I actually didn't want to arrive with my definition of peace building, precisely because I knew, like you said, James, that different people have a different understanding of what peace building means. So what I did is that during my research, I asked people, what does peace means for you? And what are the actions that have contributed to peace? Because, you know, peace building is actions that contribute to peace. And then I got stories that were fantastic. So for example, I got stories from, my favorite one is a woman from Colombia who, it's exactly what you were getting at, Peter, because James, sorry. This woman from Colombia was meeting with one of the high-level negotiator for the peace process in Colombia. And you know that the peace process in Colombia, the peace agreement has completely failed. The 2018 peace agreement has really failed. And so the negotiator was in her community and saying, I'm so sorry, I've tried, I'm so sorry, it didn't work out. Because his version of peace building was, we have a peace agreement, it's signed, and then, you know, it trickles down and everything goes well and you have no violence and no armed groups. And he saw that there were armed groups around the community. And the woman raised her hands and she gets up and she says, I don't know what you're talking about. There is peace in my community. So the negotiator was like, yes, but armed groups, I mean, why do you say that? And she says, because I can sleep in my pajamas. So the negotiator was like, what do you mean? And the woman says, well, for years, I've had to sleep all dressed, and I've had to sleep with my light on because I was always worried that you would have fighting during the night and that I would have to rush out of my home and that I would go and hide in the bush. And so I didn't dare to undress and I didn't dare to turn off the light. And for the past, since the signing of this peace agreement, I've been able to sleep in my pajama and to turn off the light. And to me, it means that there is peace. And I thought that was a fantastic story. And I have plenty of other stories like that in the book.
Thanks. Actually, that's a great connection to this large conceptual question and then to pajamas. So I'm going to combine the next two questions. They came in from Nadine and from Shobha. And both of them really reflect on where there has been either an intense convulsion of violence or a long period of tension, such as in Rwanda leading up to the genocide and then the genocide in '94. But also Shobha asked a question about Sri Lanka and said there was a 30-year civil war. And really, this has not been, I wasn't sure whether what was meant is that it hadn't been dealt with or properly acknowledged. So in both of those cases where you have these kind of legacies, what can you do to really build peace building, to do peace building between communities if these legacies have not been, I guess, well addressed? I may not have asked that very well, but yeah, go for it.
I understand the importance of addressing the legacies of the conflict, and especially in conflicts that that many observers would qualify as intractable conflicts, and with deep-seated resentment. Actually, to me, that's why the Congo stories are so important, because the conflict in Congo has lasted for since the mid 1990s. So we're at more than 20 years of extensive violence. The other conflicts in which I have found positive stories and stories of peace building that actually works are in places like, you know, in Colombia, where it's actually one of the longest running war that we currently have in the American continent. I also have positive stories from Israel and the Palestinian territories. And we all know how deep-rooted the resentment is and how the legacies of the conflict have not yet been properly addressed and been properly acknowledged. So what we can do to build peace in these places is actually support the grassroots efforts of the communities that are trying to build peace on an everyday basis. So for instance, in Israel, I haven't been to Sri Lanka, so I'm not going to give examples of Sri Lanka, but there are communities in Afghanistan that have managed now and then to build a level of peace. In Israel and the Palestinian territories, there is this fantastic village called Wahat al-Salam Neve Shalom, which has been funded precisely to show that that Israeli Jews and Palestinian people can live in peace together, and they can thrive, and they can be super happy. And so in the book, I try to show all of these different paths to peace, because as we were saying before in answer to, I think, Peter's question, we, you know, when we want to scale up and when we want to reproduce these success stories, we have to follow the specific paths of each community, of each country. But what they show us is that there is a way to do that, and that there is a role for outsiders like you and I and many people on this call. We can help, but we have to be humble. We have to change the way we help, and we have to work like the model organizations are portrayed in the book, like Resolve, like Hand Up Congo, like the Life and Peace Institute.
Okay, thanks. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to be selective now about the questions that I put to you, Séverine. But this leads very well to another question from Cynthia, which is a general one about the role of community leaders in particular in the kind of peace building initiatives that you've seen that have been successful.
So community leaders can have a positive and a negative impact. And it really depends on which community you're talking about, which leader and which period of time. Like some of the community leaders I've seen in, for example, in Wahat al Salam, Neve Shalom, or in Colombia, there is this zone of peace called San Jose de Apartado. The community leaders were extremely influential, and they played a really important role. In Itwi, the role of the traditional chiefs, for instance, the Mwamis, the Bamis, hasn't been like they've helped with peace because they try to maintain peace within their area, but they also fuel some of the discrimination and they fuel conflict between different parts of Itwi. And so that's why I think it's important to rely not only on the traditional community leaders, so whether they're the administrateur de territoire in Congo, the mayor, the local governor, the traditional chief, because sometimes they can help, but sometimes they don't. But there are community leaders. For example, in Somaliland, you have religious leaders, the imams, who are the people who actually know Sharia law very well and who know the Gzer, the local interpretation of the Quran and of Sharia law, and they are the ones who are extremely respected and who really help. In Itwi and in Congo, you have Catholic leaders who are extremely respected and who help. In Itwi they help. I know in other communities they don't. And it really depends on which leader you're talking about. But the point is that even if the usual leaders don't help, you will find people who will emerge and who will be, for example, a wise woman or a farmer or a teacher who gains the respect of the community, of the people around them, and who become a moral leader and a leader for peace, even if doesn't have any of the symbols of power or any of the trappings of power and authority that we would recognize coming from the West.
Okay, thanks. So this is the last question and it comes from Tanya. And it seemed to bring together some of the other questions that I have not been able to put to you. So she just asked, can you share your strategies for transforming Peace Inc. funding models for peace building that could meet the potential to support community peace building better? So basically, how could Peace Inc. be transformed and what could it do differently? If there are perhaps, 3 top things you could mention.
Well, okay, there is a whole book I can mention because that's basically what the whole book is about, is what works and how we can actually use that to transform Peace Inc. Okay, 3 things. If as a member of a peace building organization, follow the model of the model interveners that I portray in my book. So they're humble. They don't think that they arrive with the right theory, skills, and expertise, that they bring the ideal solutions to people's problems, but rather they respect local residents, they listen to them, and they're open-minded. They understand that different people may have a different understanding of peace, of democracy, of development, and different priorities, just like we've been talking about in response to James' question, I think. The other thing is knowing the local context well. So as a member of peace building organizations, speaking at least some of the local languages and trying to develop local networks. And the third thing is being flexible. Oh, and also taking time, working over the long term. Well, I have 6 things in the book that I have a little diagram, but I think I need to stop talking and just show you the diagram if I can find it while Michael is wrapping up the event.
Sure. Well, in fact, I thought this is a very nice way to finish. So Séverine, that's great. I can see that very clearly. So there are the 6 things that she mentioned, and they're on page 153 of the book. So what I would do is I'll wrap it up here. I think that's a very nice way to end. So Séverine, thank you so much for your presentation. Really, it is the most wonderful book, and you should feel very proud. And we're so grateful that you were able to do this presentation for us in person for the in person via Zoom for the Australian launch. And thank you everybody to your questions. So some of you may have unanswered questions, and there are 2 things you can do. First of all, the book will answer many of these, and I do urge you to get a copy. As you know, you can order it. Glee Books has an order, Glee Books, which is a local Sydney store, has an order coming in, but you can also order it through bookstores like Dymocks and of course the usual places online. The other thing you can do is register for the second event sponsored by Hand Up Congo at this festival, scheduled for this Saturday. It will discuss how people can get involved in local peace building and what that experience is like. If you read the book, please put a review online at Goodreads or Amazon or Google Books. This really does help to spread the word about books. As another author, we appreciate it so much when people can take the time to do that. If you have enjoyed this event, I would like to invite you to donate to Raising Peace via the link that will be posted in the chat, but I'll read the link out to you. So it is raisingpeace.org.au/peace-festival/. And Fergus or Diane, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. Finally, the festival has arranged for informal gathering time or networking that you can do online, allowing you to meet people. And we encourage you to do this either on the 23rd of September at 2:30 p.m. Sydney time, or on the 26th of September at 3:30 p.m. Sydney time. So that's 23rd September, 2:30 p.m. or 26th September, 3:30 p.m. And sign up for those via Eventbrite as you did for this particular event. I would like to reiterate that all festival events are free and almost all of them are interactive with leading peace activists, practitioners, and academics. Some of them totally sold out, although they're free, of course. All events will be recorded and will later be available on the Raising Peace website after the festival ends. Thank you, Séverine, and thank you, everybody. Goodbye.